Hello and welcome to Classical Stuff You Should Know, a podcast about the classical world, books, and philosophy. My name is Thomas Magby. I'm joined, as always, by Mr. AJ Hindenburg.
That's me.
And Mr. Graham Donaldson.
That's
and
me.
Our fourth co-host, AJ's cough. It will be a hacking addition to our discussion.
I guess the
today.
fourth co-host is like the whatever bacterial infection is in his lungs.
The worst. That is really unpleasant. Thankfully, you all have survived all that bacterial infection. You've made it through.
All we can say is so far.
You didn't get taken out by it at
I did
all?
not. I thought I was, but then I was
Didn't you have like a couple of days where
I
you
had a
felt
couple of days. I took
bummer?
some. I was feeling like maybe, and then I took a maintenance day, and then 2 maintenance days, and then I felt better.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I didn't get it in the
A
fullness.
maintenance day is not the same as a sick day?
I guess it is, but
Or-
it's more like I'm not like so sick, but it was like I'm feeling it, and if I push myself, I was going to get it.
Got it.
I guess it's the same thing.
Well, glad you avoided it. Today's episode is led by Graham. So your brief interaction with being slightly ill made you consider death more
That's right.
seriously? Yeah,
well,
great.
it was the genesis of this episode was in one of our classes. We're reading the Apology of Socrates. We just finished it, and that's where Socrates is standing up in court, and he's going to be put to death. And we have a whole episode on the Apology of Socrates from like a couple of years ago, and then a student asked. We were then moved into Plato's Republic, where we were talking about the Great Society. And the Great Society, according to Plato, is the society that is run by the virtuous, the aristocracy who love the good, and they run society. And we go through this class, and I sort of chart through all the different societies that exist: the aristocrats, the timocrats, the oligarchs, the democrats, and then the tyrants. And I talk about, like, it's the rule of the good, and then it's the rule of the honorable, and it's the rule of the rich, and it's the rule of the free-loving, and then you sort of do the whole thing. We put the charts. And a student asked a very good question, and she raised her hand, Scout Sowers, so shout out to you. She asked a great question. And so I'm going to immortalize her in this episode. And she said, I can't remember I won't do the fullness of the question because it's more pertinent to the class, but the essence of the comment was that everybody in those societies also seems to be motivated by a fear or a thing that they don't want. And she made reference to the fact that the aristocratic society was motivated by the fear of judgment of the gods. And then I was like, that is brilliant. That is a cool insight I've never thought about before. And we haven't yet had time to go through it in the class, but as I've been thinking about it, we could probably do it, right? The timocrats are ruled by a fear.
Who are the timocrats?
They are the honor-loving.
Okay, so usually the military is the one that kind of runs it?
But they're the ones that, like, so if you said to them, you can either really love virtue or just have everybody think you really love virtue, they would say, I don't see a difference. Whereas if you went to the aristocrats and said you could really love virtue or just appear to love virtue, they would say, that's a huge difference. I really want to love virtue. It's like that kind of thing. So the timocrats, they are ruled by a fear of...
So like they're the Romans. It's an honor society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're ruled by a fear of, like, maybe, disgrace or dishonor or losing face, that kind of thing. Yeah. And then the oligarchs are ruled by a fear of losing their material possessions. The Democrats are ruled by a fear of being limited in their appetites.
Okay, so help out those who don't know the terms. Oligarchs are
Those who love money.
okay,
Who are ruled
by the cash.
They're ruled by the rich. It's the rule of the rich.
Democrats
is the rule
of
of the people, and they are ruled by their desire to want to have optionality to indulge in all things.
Okay.
And then the tyrants are the rule of the worst. Anyway, so the point is not really to think about all of the things that they hate, although that's kind of an interesting thought. But it was her statement where she said, the aristocrats, what keeps them good is a fear of judgment, that they are worried that one day they are going to be judged by the gods. And I was like, that is absolutely fascinating. So what I want to be doing for today's podcast is I want to look at Socrates' statements about death, where he says death isn't that big a deal. And then I want to look at Hamlet's speech about the undiscovered country and where death is a massive deal. And my thesis, if there's like a hypothesis for this episode, is that having it doesn't have to be a specific framework of death, but having some sort of sense that there is an immaterial and out-of-time element of our existence that interacts with our time and material element of existence, and that those two things are related, ends up giving you a freedom and gives you kind of a levity to your life. Whereas either if you're just purely materialist and you think that this life is the only thing, or if you are, or if you don't have any, if you doubt that there is a immaterial world, it is actually going to end up being like a drag on your life. It's gonna halt your action, and it's gonna give you a tremendous amount of worry and anxiety. That's kind of the thesis. Does that make sense?
Sure.
I'm framing it as like a classical view of death and a modern view of death, and using Aristotle to highlight the classical view and Hamlet to highlight the modern one.
The modern view is only material, no.
Either only material, or I just can't be sure,
Right.
and in my unsureness, it ends up stopping action, and then I am anxious and sad in life.
Okay.
The other genesis of this is we've talked about maybe in the podcast before in our happiness episode about Arthur Brooks. Arthur Brooks did that sort of famous study of what makes people happy, and the three things he found was one. You have like people who care about you, friends and family who actually who care about your life. You have meaningful work to do in this life. People who are counting on you, your actions are like necessary. You have a feeling that actions are necessary. And then the last one, the ones that people tend to poo-poo, is you have a framework for death. You have a framework for what happens after you die. Now, Arthur Brooks says that framework can be anything, as long as you have an operating framework. And I don't know if it can be anything. And I actually think that the Hamlet framework actually doesn't help you be happy. It sort of hurts. Okay, that's kind of the so let's look at it. So Aristotle, when he is on trial, he is put on trial, and they're basically saying, like, if you don't shape up and sort of toe the line of Athens society and stop friggin' annoying people, we're going to kill you. And hoping that the fear of death is going to sort of keep Socrates in line. Socrates is going to stop annoying people like he did our last episode.
It's true.
And Socrates gives a defense as to why death is actually not a thing to be feared. So do either of you guys remember it from maybe episodes past? Socrates' reasons why we should not fear death.
Isn't it essentially that we haven't experienced it, and so we don't know if it's bad or good, and therefore it could be good, and so there's no reason to fear that which we do not know?
Kind of, yeah. That's very close.
So it's like, so if there's an afterlife, tell me, and you've done well in life, then you're rewarded in death. So that's good. And if there's no awareness after death, then you've lived a good life going into it. And so what's the point of the fear of it?
Yes. He says it's either a couple of, well, let's read it. Socrates says, you would consider it shameful if you stationed me in a military position and said, guard this wall, and I abandoned it. You would say that's shameful. And Socrates says he is convinced that he has been asked by God to do his Socratic mission of trying to seek out the good in the city. And so he says this: terrible that would be, and truly then someone might justly bring me into a law court, saying that I do not believe that there are gods, since I would be disobeying the divination, and fearing death, and supposing that I am wise when I am not. For to fear death, man, is in fact nothing other than to seem to be wise, but not to be so. For it is to seem to know what one does not know. No one knows whether death does not even happen to be the greatest of all goods. So, point AJ, for the human being. But people fear it as though they knew well that it is the greatest of all evils. And how is this not that reproachable ignorance of supposing that one knows what one does not know? But I, man, am perhaps distinguished from the many human beings also here in this. And if I were to say that I am wiser than anyone in anything, it would be in this, that since I do not know sufficiently about the things in Hades, so also I suppose that I do not know. But I know that it is bad and shameful to do injustice and to disobey one's better, whether God or human being. So he says, so I'm not going to fear death, because I don't know if that's something I should fear. And I'm not going to fear death by doing something, but if doing injustice keeps me from death, I know doing injustice is the wrong thing. And I don't know that dying doesn't happen to necessarily be a good thing. Therefore, I'm not going to fear death. And then he says, let's see where he says. And then later on, he's at the end, when he's been condemned to death, Socrates recounts and he says, let's look at now he's been condemned to death and he's going to die. He says this. Let us also think in the following way, how great a hope there is that death, is good. Now being dead is either of two things. For either it is like being nothing, and the dead man has no perception of anything, or else, in accordance with the things that are said, it happens to be a sort of change and migration of the soul from the place here to another place. So he says death's either one of two things. It's a great nothing, or it is some sort of change from here to another place. The soul is changing from here to another place. And if, in fact, there is no perception, but it is like a sleep, in which the sleeper has no dream at all, death would be a wondrous gain. For I suppose that if someone had to select the night in which he slept so soundly that he did not even dream, and had to compare the other nights and days of his own life with that night, and then had to say on consideration how many days and nights in his own life he had lived better and more pleasantly than that night, then I suppose that the great King Cyrus himself, not to mention some private man, would discover that they are easy to count in comparison with the other days and nights. So he's saying, like, imagine like the best sleep you've ever had, the awesomest sleep. You didn't have bad dreams, and it was amazing. And if you thought about like all the days that you've lived, and you can compare it to that amazing sleep that you had, yeah, maybe some days would be better than that sleep, but no one's going to be like, man, I friggin' hate sleeping great. Mm-hmm. Everyone's going to be, at some point people will be like, having a great night's sleep is pretty awesome. And if death is like that, that's then not so bad, says Socrates. Mm-hmm. So if death is something like this, I at least say it is a gain. For all time appears in this way indeed to be nothing more than one night. On the other hand, if death is like a journey from here to another place, and if the things that are said are true, that in fact all the dead are there, then what greater good could there be than this, judges? For if one who arrives in Hades, released from these here who claim to be judges, will find those who are judges in truth, the very ones who are said to give judgment there, Minos and Rhadamanthus and Aeacus and Triptolemus, and those of the other demigods who turned out to be just in their own lives, would this journey be a paltry one? Or again, to associate with Orpheus and Musaeus and Hesiod and Homer, how much would any of you give? For I'm willing to die many times if these things are true, since especially for myself, spending time there would be wondrous. Whenever I happen to meet Palamedes and Telamone and Ajax, or anyone of the ancients who died because of an unjust judgment, I would compare my own experience with theirs. And I suppose it would not be unpleasant. And certainly the greatest thing is that I would pass my time examining and searching out among those there, just as I do to those here. Who among them is wise, and who supposes he is but is not? How much would one give, judges, to examine him who led the great army against Troy, or Odysseus, or Sisyphus, or the 1,000 others whom one might mention, both men and women? To converse and associate with them and to examine them there would be inconceivable happiness. Certainly there those surely do not kill on this account. For those there are happier than those here, not only in other things, but also in that they are immortal, henceforth for the rest of time, at least if the things that are said are in fact true. And that's a very important little clause that I want to say at the end, that Socrates gives this whole thing and he says, in that many are, if at least the things that are said are in fact true. The things that are said are...
About the afterlife?
Yes, that when you die, there is some kind of movement of the soul, and you are in a place where you are still you, and you are immortal, and you are in some kind of place where the you-ness continues on. I think that's kind of an important thing. That whoever you are continues on, and your temperament and attitude and disposition can sort of continue. And then Socrates famously ends the dialogue with, "It's now time for me to go away, I to die and you to live. Which of us goes to a better thing is unclear to everyone except to God," which is such an he's so good in that.
There's a mic drop, right?
Yes, there's a mic drop. So Socrates gives sort of this famous defense that death is not a thing to be feared. And the reasons he give are if it's just sort of like a fading into sleep.
That's
Sounds
not
awesome.
so bad.
That sounds great.
Sounds like a good night.
Or if the things that we are been told are true, that we continue on in some capacity, then I'm going to continue on in the same way that I'm going to continue on in my pursuit of doing no injustice. I want to live seeking out. I don't want to, by accident or on purpose, do anything unjust because unjust things are bad for the soul, says Socrates. And you telling me to stop talking about philosophy is an injustice, and I'm not going to do it. Says God's told me to do it, says Socrates. Therefore, I'm cool dying for it. And everyone's like, oh, stop being such an idiot. And so Socrates has this like dogged determination and to continue to do no injustice, and that he has a vision of the afterlife that says he is going to continue on this way. And because of that, Socrates doesn't have this sort of fear or anxiety or worry about death. And in fact, it gives structure to his life. And the structure that it gives his life is one of sort of integrity, courage, a framework for how to behave. He knows what he needs to do when he wakes up, and that is to not do injustice and to seek out the good in the city. He has a mission that he thinks is divinely given, which is to be like an annoying fly that is supposed to waken up the horse of Athens, the famous gadfly analogy. And he's not going to let the fear of death sort of keep him from this. Now, whenever I've taught this, students have pointed out that Socrates, there is a third option about death. And it's the one that Metsif AJ remembers from his years of teaching Crime and Punishment. It's the option that, Svidrigailov gives about death. Remember Svidrigailov's vision of death?
It's a dark place full of spiders, like a dark room.
Yeah. So now, and Svidrigailov says, I'm haunted by the idea that death is just a dark room full of spiders. And that ends up filling Svidrigailov with dread and fear. How come Socrates doesn't have that vision of it?
Maybe it's not in his cultural ethos.
Yeah. That would be my guess, is that it's not, that's sort of like, Svidrigailov sort of invented that idea.
The funny thing is it lines right up with what the Mesopotamians believed.
Is that death is like a place full of spiders?
Not quite a place full of spiders, but what they believed in, at least in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the underworld is described as a place where you crouch in a dark cave all day and you have meals of clay. It's they call it the House of Dust. You basically go down, eat dirt. You're ruled by these weird wing-like creatures. You're naked. It's dark. It sucks.
Everybody goes there?
Yeah.
There's no. What about the virtuous people?
I think really your only hope is to become somehow one of the immortals, which is what drives Gilgamesh mad.
So there's a hope.
Very small number of people.
A very small number of people. Gilgamesh does eventually make it, not in the book, but according to later myths, he eventually becomes one of the men in the stars.
Oh.
His buddy does not. The only other guy that they know of that this happens for who is not a god is essentially that world's Noah, Utnapishtim. To make somebody not go to this place, basically it needs a worldwide flood. That was the only instance where it happened. Everybody else goes there. That's it. Like there's one guy, and then Gilgamesh, I think, somehow does it eventually. But not in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In that, he dies.
Yeah. But in the story, it's a story about wanting to escape that thing.
That's why he goes crazy, because he's like, I don't want that.
Yeah. Cool. That's interesting. Anyway, so Svidrigailov has got that vision of sort of this punishment place.
It isn't like the thing people are concerned about is the annihilation at death. So even whether it's reward or punishment, consciousness persists.
Yeah, but even Socrates is like, if consciousness doesn't persist, it's just kind of like
he's fine with it.
He's fine with it.
But
it's this sort of awesome. It's this awesome sleep.
You buy this as a framework? You think this works?
I do. I think so. I think I buy that Socrates is you don't need to be scared of it. Or the thing that I buy with Socrates is when he says, "What do I know? I know that doing injustice is bad. What don't I know? I don't really know what death is. It could be a good thing, and it could be a bad thing. It could be nothingness." Socrates says we sort of have two received stories, and this is why I'm just thinking about our last episode about true opinion, or about like the hearing of things that have come from other people. What is the true opinion of death? Because that's the thing that we can't. Oh, sorry, for people that are maybe just coming into this episode, go maybe listen to last week's episode where we talk about like, can something be taught? What can virtue be taught, or is virtue a true opinion? And I'm wondering if like this idea about death being is the only is like a true opinion, because we don't really know what it's like to die, but there are all these stories of that there is that we have our what is it? Our in time and material life, and there is an out of time and immaterial place, and that those two things are intersected, and that the things that we do in our time and material life have some kind of bearing and ramification on the immaterial and out of time, that those two things are together. Even in the Epic of Gilgamesh, like there's, maybe that's more of a fatalistic story, but there's a desire and a hope that it's not true, and that maybe the flood is going to change it, and there's still the human hope that what we do in this life is meaningful, and Socrates is sort of embodying this. David Hicks, in one of his a classical, I guess he was a classical educator, I don't know what he is now. He's a farmer.
Yeah.
But he says
Translator.
Translator.
Books.
He wrote the article that we've talked about in this episode called "Is Classical Education Still Possible?" And he said that one of the presuppositions of classical education, one of the necessary things that you need in order to train up somebody in virtue, which is the goal of classical education, is to basically like bring someone from child to adult, to bring someone into the fullness of human existence capacities, like knowing things, their behavior, and basically making people happy by making them good. You need to have one of the things that you need is a belief in that there is an afterlife, and that your actions on this life are somehow meaningful for the afterlife, in the positive or in the negative. That it is supposed to rein in our bad behaviors. A fear of judgment is to rein in our bad behaviors, and a hope of continuation of our brain, of our minds and our souls and our body, or not our bodies, our minds and our souls and our temperament and attitudes and personality will continue on in some place that is not wildly unpleasant. That the Greeks had, Plato's not talking about, or Socrates isn't talking about, the plains of Elysium in some sort of like paradise. He's just sort of saying like a holding room where there's a bunch of cool people you can talk to. Like everyone's just sort of chilling at the DMV, and you get to go like sit down next to Ajax and pick his brains for a little bit until he tells you to leave or whatever. And for Socrates, that sounds pretty great because he likes talking to people. So David Hicks is saying that is a necessary component. You need to have that in place for people to be educated. And the point of his article is he doesn't think that in contemporary modern culture we still have that framework of an afterlife. Therefore, classical education is just going to be like techniques and propaganda. I don't know. Whatever
Or
the point of his
marketing,
article
like he
was.
talks about, like it will appeal to certain people because it sounds like something ancient,
Yes,
unique or something.
But it's not truly, yeah. And so I look at this and I say Socrates with that framework is happy. He does he have the like is he taught this? Like, does he know this 100%? No. He almost has like a faith in the belief that my actions in the here and now are meaningful. Therefore, I am going to live into virtue with knowing that the gods are not going to abandon him. Socrates also in the Apology says, the good man has nothing to fear. because of that belief that that the gods are not going to abandon a good man, a person who loves the code, who loves the good thing. The gods will not abandon. So he has this sort of that sort of framework. Let me see if I can find where it says. I'm not gonna be able to find it. Anyway, okay. I can't find it. So that is a very much this sort of this classical idea. Now, of course, Christianity comes along and says, in sort of on top of the classical world, says, here's also the framework. The framework is we sort of flesh it out, because here is somebody who has come from the other side, who comes in and talks about what the kingdom of heaven is, and that the kingdom of heaven can start now, and it's a relationship and faith in Christ, and basically like that other world begins here and now in our life of faith and in the church. So of course, having that kind of framework is, as Christians, that framework is something that sort of is supposed to modulate our life, right? Okay, let's contrast. I want to contrast that with Hamlet. So Hamlet is this play where Hamlet's is almost too clever about everything, or he's not cynical. What would you call Hamlet? He's not cynical. He's too dialectic. He's too.
He overthinks everything.
He overthinks it.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Is that he is so overthinking that it brings him to a place where he can't land on a solid ground to be able to build something, to be able to build a structure for his life, and so he doesn't act. So I want to look at Hamlet's famous speech about death, and this is sort of the reason why he's contemplating: should he kill his uncle? Should he avenge his father's death? Should he avenge his father's murder by going after the guy who murdered his dad? Should he go and bring a murderer to justice? Should he do this or not? And he doesn't even know if his dad's been murdered because a weird ghost told him. And then Hamlet's sort of saying, and as he's thinking through this, he's like, well, why do we even do anything? And that's, the famous to be or not to be. So let's read this speech. And my thesis is, and I'm interested in hearing your opinion on this, is that Hamlet is embodying this overthinkingness when it comes, or he wants assurance of what it is, and until he can get that assurance, he doesn't know how to act in this world. Whereas Socrates with his, well, it's either one or two things. It's either nothing, it's like sleep, or it's what we've been told our whole life, which sounds pretty good. Either way, what I do here and now matters. Hamlet does not know if what he does here and now matters. All right, here comes Hamlet, holding a skull. Oh, and that's later. Here comes Hamlet. To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take up arms against a sea of troubles and, by opposing, end them. To die, to sleep, no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand and natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep, perchance, to dream. There's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come, when we have shuffled off this mortal coil, must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurs that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country, from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all. and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied over with the pale cast of thought. And enterprises of great pitch and moment with this regard their currents torn awry, and lose the name of action. Okay. Conscience makes cowards of all. So what's Hamlet's point? And why he's like, life kind of sucks. You've got like bureaucracies, and you've got injustice, and you've got like people who kind of make fun of you, and you've got all these sorts of slings and arrows of fortune, and you're at the whims of things going your way and things going against your way. It is a hard thing to live through life. And there's only one thing that keeps us doing it and not just throwing ourselves off a cliff. And what is it?
Fear.
Yeah.
Fear of the unknown. Which is hilarious to me, considering he's talked to a ghost already.
Yes. But it's not just the fear. But the thing is...
Yeah, Hamlet knows. He knows that there's something after death.
But the interesting thing about the ghost is when the ghost talks to him about what's happening, it does not conform to... like
what he thought what it was going to be.
It does not conform to what he thought the afterlife was supposed to be. Like the ghost says, I get let out of hell and I get to wander around, and then I have to go back, and because I haven't received justice in my lifetime, and it's like that's not if Catholic medieval understandings of life, and so Hamlet's like so Hamlet doesn't know what to think, because you've got this ghost coming in and saying all sorts of crazy things, and maybe the ghost is a demon sent to tempt him. Maybe the ghost actually is his father, and he doesn't know what to think. So I guess my question is like, why is Hamlet a coward and Socrates brave in the face of death? They're both clever guys. They're both very smart. They're both incredibly intellectual, and they can both like see through BS. But why is Hamlet ground to anxious misery, and Socrates has this kind of like rise above it all levity when it comes to life and struggle and ultimately death?
Can I disagree with?
Sure.
I think it was Hicks. Didn't Hicks say you kind of needed
You need a framework. You need
some
the
sort
framework.
of afterlife framework?
Brooks.
Brooks. Yes.
So when I was listening to those two quotes, the thing that stands out to me, and the thing that I think is often missed in classical education, we assume that what that framework does for us is provide us like a reason to be good or bad, right? If I'm good, I'll go to heaven. If I'm bad, I'll go to hell. There's that framework for like controlling our actions that is necessary for this kind of education. If that's the premise, like...
just before you go on, I don't think that's what it is.
That's the premise, yeah.
What do you mean? You don't think
I
that's
don't
why
think
Hamlet
I don't think the premise is be a good boy, go to heaven, be a bad boy, go to hell. I don't think that's what that premise is doing.
Okay, well, but I think that feels like what Brooks wants.
No, Brooks just says people are happy when they kind of like have it solved in their own hearts.
Okay, which is funny because Socrates doesn't. He doesn't know what's coming.
But he hasn't solved. He's cool with either way. He's cool with either option.
Okay.
That's why Socrates works, right? But we'll get there.
Yeah. So the point I want to make is that an attitude, and here's what is different to me about these two attitudes, is like, yes, Socrates has it solved, but he doesn't really. He says, I don't know what it is, and to say that I do know what it is stupid. I'm not sure what it is. I'm not going to fear the unknown. That's dumb. Hamlet does fear the unknown. He doesn't know what's coming, and he's terrified. To me, the difference is that Socrates sees value in his work in the here and now. He knows virtue is good. He knows what he's doing is valuable. The gods have told him to do it. It is a thing worth doing. And if he gets to keep doing it, great. If he doesn't get to keep doing it because he doesn't exist anymore, fine. He knows that right here, what he's doing is valuable. Hamlet seems to view life as an absolute abysmal pit. There is no doing good. The only thing that keeps us going is a fear of the unknown. Like, that's what he thinks is motivating his entire life. For Socrates, there's other things motivating his life. He has a mission. Doesn't matter what comes afterwards. He's doing something valuable. And this is why I don't like the whole, like, we have heaven and hell as motives for our action. The ancients would have said, we do virtue because virtue is good in and of itself in the here and now in our life. Doesn't matter what comes afterwards. You do virtue because it's good. I think we have somewhat lost that in modern Christian education, saying we have heaven and hell to keep us going. And we forget that virtue is worthwhile in and of itself in the here and now.
The sort of pushbacks on that is, one, Socrates believes that he has been given a divinely inspired mission. So if he's going to put his cards down on if death is like a nothingness or if death is what we've heard the stories tell us, he believes that death is what he's heard the stories tell us. Like he has that. If it just so happens that those stories are all wrong and we just are nothing, he's fine with that. But Socrates believes that there is a Hades and he's going to it.
Okay, but so does Hamlet. Hamlet knows there's something coming after. He's talked to a ghost.
Yes.
He knows there's something there.
But the thing that Socrates believes is that it's not just that virtue is good for the here and now, it's also that it is something that is going to be... He does have more of that, like, if you're a good boy, it is going to go good for you in heaven. And that does motivate it.
For
For Socrates.
Yeah.
Whereas Hamlet is not convinced in the value of virtue here or there, whereas Socrates, is animated by that sense that the gods are not going to be like doing an injustice is wrong, and the gods are going to reward you for your justice. Let me find the quote.
Because you could imagine a Socrates who is fine with his work in the day-to-day, knows he's doing something important, like feels that it's very valuable, and then completely despair at the end of his life because that mission is going away. The point here is how does he approach death, right? Mm-hmm. Is he despairing or is he accepting of it? And it's because he has this kind of, no matter what the outcome is, he's thought through it and has an answer to it, right? Like, isn't that the benefit here?
Yes. I think that to me, the distinction between the two of them is
Socrates doesn't need the answer up front.
Socrates doesn't need the answer up front, but Socrates has a faith that virtue is going to also profit him after death, and that therefore death is a thing that you don't even need to fear, and that gives him this sort of levity in life, whereas Hamlet doesn't have the faith in the good, and so he's terrified of the undiscovered country. Svidrigailov realizes that like his life of doing terrible means that he should be going to the dark room with spiders.
Also, it's not very respectful to spiders. A lot of those guys are great.
Spiders are awesome. You are never more than like 6 feet away from a spider at any time.
Terrifying. Does he think he's going there as punishment, or he thinks everyone goes to the room with spiders?
I think that he thinks either way. Either everyone's going there or just he is, but he's going there either way.
He thinks he's going there.
Because he has done some bad stuff.
He's done some pretty bad stuff.
He's not a great dude.
I'm not being able to find where it says that. Here we go. So here's where Socrates talks about that nothing bad can happen to a good person. At the end of Apology, he says, "But you two judges should be of good hope towards death, and you should think that this one thing to be true, that there is nothing bad for a good man, whether living or dead, and that the gods are not without care for his troubles. Nor have my present troubles arisen of their own accord, but it is clear to me now that it is better, after all, for me to be dead and to have been released from all troubles." So even Socrates has a desire to be released from the troubles of life. But he has this sense that there is nothing bad for a good man. This is also why the sign did not turn me away, so the strong sense that God has sort of told him to do this thing. And then he sort of says that his judges are to be worthy of blame because they are not good men. I don't know how much, I don't know how long we're already into this. I think that just the thing that I find fascinating is that there's so much in common between Socrates and Hamlet in thinking about, but their different view of death freezes Hamlet, and he is so anxious about it that he can't act in this life. And Socrates is sort of clear-mindedness about death, even though he doesn't have like the pinpoint answer of what it is, but the fact that he kind of has it generally solved, the fact that he sort of says like, you know what, for being good, the gods are not going to hate a good person. The good man has nothing to fear in front of the gods. Gives Socrates kind of this like like sort of this levy, this sort of blasé, laissez-faire attitude. I've always, my whole life, been attracted to that sort of hand wavy attitude towards death. When I was a little kid, I remember reading the story of he's an American military guy from World War One. They actually ended up naming a frigate after him because I'm trying to find his name. Thomas, you can sort of Google as I say. They named a frigate after him, and he's known, and maybe this is going to get us, I don't know if this is going to put an E for explicit on this episode, but in World War I, he was commanded by his officers to go charge an enemy line, and he turned to his buddies, little comrades who were in the trench kind of scared about charging the enemy line. He said, come on. No, he's like, let's go, boys. Do you sons of bitches want to live forever? And he sort of had that was sort of his attitude. He's like, sure, you guys don't want to live forever, do you? And he charged the embankment and took it and ended up winning like the Medal of Honor or whatever. And they named a frigate after him. I can't remember his name.
I don't see it yet. Still looking.
But for some reason, there was just something about that kind of like
Daniel Daly?
Yeah, I think it's it. I think it's Daly. That kind of like that sort of like jovial, laughing in the face of death kind of attitude, I've always found to be very attractive. I've always think that is like there's something very sort of settled and happy about that. And I think that Socrates' disposition is the one that we would want to cultivate in our hearts and minds more than we would want to cultivate Hamlet. And I think modern life gears us more towards Hamlet because of the overthinkingness aspect of it. And Socrates is sort of like almost his little simple faith in the stories, his simple faith in the belief in the goodness of God is a thing that ends up giving his life sort of like a levity to it. I know I often I sort of use this meme as a joke, but you know the bell curve meme where like you got the troglodyte on one side and the sage on the other, and the guy in the middle being like, "Meh." I kind of feel like Hamlet's the guy in the middle being like, "No, who knows what death is? It could be all sorts of different things. It's this undiscovered country. It could be all sorts of blah blah blah." And then the people on each side are being like, "The good man has nothing to fear." Anyway, I know that this is a particularly a topic that AJ thinks about a lot, which is another reason why I kind of suggested it. You look pensive. You're either super friggin' tired and bored, or you're thinking lots of things. Yeah, it's maybe
He was holding in a cough that whole time. Thanks for saying that.
I am very tired, but I'm thinking two things. One's a question. Mm-hmm. So one question is, do you think that the difference between these two men is less how they feel about death and more the mission they have in life?
No,
because
I know. I don't want to reduce it to that.
Well, can I explain?
You can.
So
No.
So Socrates has a mission from the gods that he was clearly given from the oracle, something that is very clearly good to find the wise man, to like pull everyone towards virtue. Mm-hmm. Hamlet has been given a very weird, loose, like vengeance story from a ghost from hell that he's not even really sure is legitimate, and he's not really sure what's legitimate. And so no wonder the two men are having different ideas about what they should be doing, right? One is very clear, cut and dried. This is a good thing. You can commit your life to it. Hamlet doesn't have anything clear to commit his life to. No wonder he wants out of it. It's kind of a nightmare. And in that way, I think he is very modern. I can buy that their attitude about death has a big piece to do with it. I'm just wondering if this is also a contributor.
Yeah, I mean, there are things that Hamlet should have gone about to do to give himself more assurance. The fact that he wants to figure out if his uncle's a murderer by like observing how he reacts to a play is kind of trash.
Dude,
when
yeah.
he should have like gathered people from the city to like, you know, was there any witnesses? Did anybody see this kind of thing? Like he could have gone about it a little more like police detective and a little less like High School Musical.
Seems like Hamlet always chooses the High School Musical version.
He does, and so maybe there's something to that. But I don't just think like if Socrates was in Hamlet's context and Hamlet was in Socrates' context, they would flip. Like I still think if Hamlet was in Socrates' context, Hamlet would still be, I don't know what to do. And Socrates, in Hamlet's context, would not have feared dying. He would have tried to figure out what happened to his father, and he would have, then with a series of questions to Polonius, would have come to the conclusion as to what happened.
Well,
right?
and that's the thing is, I'm not even sure he would do. I think he'd be like, "What is death?" And then he'd be like, "Oh, hey, Socrates, who cares?"
But there's something about
What is the essence of form of vengeance?
there's something about Socrates' faith. Well, I think it comes down to Socrates says, "I know that doing injustice is wrong." I don't know if Hamlet thinks that. I think Hamlet's more in the I don't know if there is a thing called justice or if it's just our naked power.
Yeah. Hamlet's all kinds of confused in all sorts of ways. So, second thought.
Well, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that then this comes down to Socrates, in a weird way, I would say, has a true opinion about death that Hamlet does not. But they both aren't going to be able to have assurance of what the afterlife is. But Socrates,
Hamlet more so than Socrates.
yes, exactly. But Socrates has what if the reality is to Socrates it's just a dark room full of spiders? I would say maybe even Socrates wouldn't be miserable. I don't know. He talked to spiders, but
Ask them questions. What is the
he'd
form of
ask some
spiderness?
questions. But or he would just love observing their natures or something.
Yeah.
That's more Aristotle. But I guess maybe it's just that Socrates has such a deep knowledge of who he is that he knows that whatever context he's in, he's going to be fine. But the other question is, what if the afterlife is just absolute miserable, painful torture forever? And that's what. But we don't have. But those aren't the stories we get. Those aren't the. That's.
But I think if you're Socrates, that doesn't change what you do now. He still he can still do good now. He still be virtuous. Anyway.
The other thing, maybe this is an in-between episode. The other thing I want to say is I actually think having a framework that says a fear of hell or a hope of heaven is actually a perfectly fine thing to have. Anyway, but we can talk more. I want to hear your second thing.
My second thing is you talk about how a man who approaches death with levity is an attractive thing. I totally agree. I think the jolly sage is attractive in general. So someone who is incredibly wise and smart and knows the ways of the world and experienced, the 60-year-old man, even the young man who can look at death, say, I understand what you are, still I'm happy. I can understand the world and the motives of man, and still I'm happy. I think, and this has always been one of my platforms, I talk with my kids about it every year, that we seem to believe, and I know I've talked about it on the podcast, this is us just rehashing stuff, but we seem to believe that wisdom brings sadness, with more, wisdom brings more sorrow, and I think to an extent that is true. I think when you ground it in redemptive history, it flips. I think all of a sudden you can do nothing but be happy. Knowing that the sorrows of man have been solved forever and that you are destined for, if provided you're a believer, destined for bliss. I think the only conclusion is a happy one. And so the wise man is the jolly one. And it's a picture I'm endlessly attracted to. The crazy man up on the hillside dispensing wisdom, and he is having the best time of his life all the time. I love that. I love that image. I think the sad sage, the one who is filled with sorrow because he knows the ways of the world, it's a modern idea, and it makes me depressed.
Yes, I agree, and
it's modern. It's definitely modern.
It's definitely a modern idea, and I don't know. Maybe it's wrong to ascribe it to Hamlet, but Hamlet sort of seems to have those sort of characteristics that this, because he doesn't have a settled metaphysics, because he doesn't have a framework of what. He doesn't even necessarily believe if justice is the right thing to do. Then he doesn't have, when actually the real harshness of life comes to him, he doesn't know how to behave and how to act or how to do courageous things until he's kidnapped by pirates. Being kidnapped by pirates helps put everything into perspective, I think.
Problem solved.
Maybe what's riding around up there? Any thoughts?
Well, I was just thinking there's sorry to cut you off. there's an Ecclesiastes Bible verse about, with much wisdom comes much sorrow. So I'm just reading the context to see if there's any more like
Oh, I see.
thing in that. I knew it came from somewhere in scripture, but I'm wondering how, like, if that rings true always. That's definitely pre-Christ.
I don't think it rings true always.
No.
Well, yeah.
What does Hamlet mean when he says conscience?
Yeah, that's a great question. That was the other thing I was thinking as I was reading it. Let's see what we have. Why won't you just stab yourself? Who would bear the sweat and regret in a weary life? But it's the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country, for new who travel returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear the ills we have. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all. The text notes is saying that it's meaning consciousness and knowledge, as opposed to like a sense of a conscience of rightness and wrongness.
It's just like he's wrong on that, right? Like he's wrong to say that thoughts of the afterlife, thoughts of death make cowards of us all.
Yeah.
It makes cowards of him, and he thinks that's everyone. But Socrates is not a coward. As he
And
approaches
literally
death.
everything makes a coward of Hamlet.
Fair. And so, yes. So I think, I don't know if this is a thing you're getting to, but he's wrong.
But the other thing is like, okay, let's say Hamlet, for the sake of argument, is not virtuous.
A little tough argument.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
And at some level, Hamlet knows it. That would give you a fear. If you know that you are not virtuous, and then the afterlife is one of two things. If it is a place where your actions in time and material, time and space, do have meaning for out of time and out of space, and there is some kind of assessment of your actions, and you know that you do the wrong things and you don't love the good things, that would make you scared of death. But if it was nothing, if it was a big black nothing, and you don't have any sort of faith that doing the right thing now is worth it, regardless of whether or not heaven exists or not, then you are completely adrift and lost in what you should be doing now, and that's tremendously like anxiety producing. So like Hamlet really is somebody who needs to be trained in like he's somebody who needs a belief in goodness. I mean, or if you even want to put it in our Christian context, he needs saving, right? He needs to be brought out of the place where he's at. He is lost in this dark place, and where he realizes that he himself can't do the thing that he wants in order to get out. He can't bring himself virtuous. I guess the thing that I find so fascinating about Socrates is that he is as close to like Christian truth without Christ,
Yeah.
right? He gets to the very cusp of it, which is he desires the goodness of he has a faith in the goodness of God. He desires he basically wants to be sinless. He doesn't want to sin because he knows sinning is unhealthy for the soul, and he wants to find the person who is going to teach him the thing itself. Every year I teach Socrates, students always point out, man, Socrates wants Jesus. That's who he wants him to, that's who is the person who he wants to teach the form of the good. Is that if Socrates sat down and met Jesus, and Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, Socrates would be like, yep, yeah, you are. That's yes. And Socrates could ask him questions about like, so what is goodness? And Christ the answers that Christ would give about the will of the Father, Socrates would be like, yes, gotcha. I know it's going to rankle feathers out there, which is fine. Whereas Hamlet is lost. Hamlet is, both Socrates and Hamlet, both want the same thing. They want that settled. They want the settled happiness of virtue and of life with God. But anyway, that framework that they lack. I don't know. our modern world lends itself to that more Hamlet mode of thinking. And I know that we have a mental health crisis. People point to, our cell phone addictions and all these kinds of things. But I wonder if it is also a spiritual crisis where we don't have that framework that our actions mean something. Because, and this is AJ, this was my point with saying that a sense that a hope of heaven and a fear of hell, I don't think if that's the only sort of way that you frame the framework, I don't think that's helpful, and I don't even think that's the gospel. But I think that a hope of heaven and a fear of hell does tell you that your actions mean something. So, I mean, when I was growing up in Christianity, there was a big push to not want to scare kids about hell and not want to worry kids about heaven. They really wanted to like sort of shy away from that because they had grown up maybe with like the fire and brimstone sermons, and they're like, oh, those weren't very good, and I don't really want our kids to have this. But I think that the pendulum swings in the other way, and then you have a generation of Christians growing up and saying like, well, my moral actions have no bearing because it's all what Jesus did for me on the cross, and I don't need to do anything good or bad because I don't have anything to fear because Jesus did it all, and therefore now I have no frame of reference for my moral behavior in this life. That's really wrong, and I think we have to do a lot of work as modern Christians to sort of undo that bad mode of thinking. No, how you behave matters. Your words and speech and faithfulness to friends and family and spouse matter. Like all this stuff matters. It can't just be Jesus paid it all, so I get to kind of like fart around. Yeah. So there, as in that sense, I do think like a framework that your behavior in this life could go bad for you if you give yourself into vice. Is a helpful thing. It doesn't matter that it's scary for a ninth grader. It doesn't have to. That's not the whole of the story. Yeah. Anyway,
What else you got?
I got nothing else. That's it. That's it. I guess maybe just that. Realizing that we are also spiritual beings, that having a metaphysic of our ethical world, that is important to human happiness. That it's not just, well, this is going to get me the things that I want. Because if your behavior is just in the here and now, well, if you can get away with something and no one knows about it, you're going to do it. But if you have a metaphysic that says, there is an omnipotence that always sees your actions, and it's going to keep you from vice, and you love virtue, then that's I think that actually people think that that's going to give people all these kind of like crazy complexes about guilt, and I think the opposite is true. It opens it up to people realizing that my behavior actually means something, and you have agency. So don't believe the movies and the television shows or whatever where people who believe in heaven, heaven and hell, it freezes them and they turn into like weird people, weird idiosyncratic people in this life who don't know how to behave, and like the real heroes are the ones that like are materialists or whatever. I think it's the opposite is true. I think that if just the here and now exists, your life is filled with a tremendous amount of anxiety. And if you have some sort of sense that there is justice in the world, in the universe that matters, and all the bad will one day be brought to justice, and all the good will be held up and said that this is good, is a tremendously liberating thing. Yeah.
All right. This has been Classical Stuff You Should Know. You can find us online at classicalstuff.net. You can find us on Twitter at ClassicalStuff, CLSSCAL stuff. You can find us on Patreon, patreon.com/classicalstuff, and you can email us at theguys@classicalstuff.net. Thank you all for listening, and I guess we're going to do an in-between after this,
Sure.
which you can find on our Patreon. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.